أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Come on. You guys don't know our theme this year for Ramadan, do you? That's not going to fly in this month. You'll know tomorrow night, inshallah. It's Friday night. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to begin our program. Before I formally introduce Sister Laila, we're going to hear a few words from our religious director here. For those who are from out of the area, Dr. Shabi al-Masri, to share with us a few words, inshallah ta'ala.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. First of all, I want to welcome you to our center. It's an honor to have someone like yourself be with us today and come all the way out here to speak to our community. As many of you know, my PhD was on dawah. Being surrounded by living in a non-Muslim country, the number one role and really the only justification to live outside of a Muslim country and surrounded by Muslims is to do dawah. So, having done a PhD on the subject matter of dawah, naturally looked at all these movements. Now, in history, you very rarely see, you hear about it, but you rarely see in your lifetime a mass conversion to Islam. In the past, when we saw mass conversions into Islam, you think, oh, that was easy. They just waltzed in, showed some miracles, and boom, villages entered Islam. Nothing's ever that simple and easy. I want you to think back to a period of time where information was extremely hard to get. And that's not so long ago. At the time of our guest's father and grandfather, information was extremely hard to come by. What happened from the 50s to the 70s is nothing other than direct work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring in this many people into Islam. And we can point to the individuals who are part of this. And this community continues on. But you have to understand that they lived in a period of time that simply to get a translation of the Quran was a feat. It's not like a day today. Nobody could hoodwink anybody. If you truly wanted to get to the bottom of a fact, it's going to take you about 10 minutes. That's it. If I really want to know if the Buddhist scripture says something, or the law of New Jersey says something, it's not going to take me more than 10 minutes of taking if I'm literate and I have one of these. I can get to the bottom of things. That wasn't the case in those times. And for them to have brought this many people into Islam, Sister Layla's father has been honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the final piece. Really the final chapter of one book, but the beginning of another book. Not another chapter, a whole other book. Because this history begins with W.D. Fard, who was probably, well, you know better than me, Pakistani. Probably a Pakistani from California, who was a Qadiani. And then it ends with W.D. Then a whole new book begins. Now, all right, you have all these. That's really nice. How are you going to shepherd tens of thousands of followers in a time when you did shepherd followers? Today, no one shepherds anybody. Everyone does their own thing, right? That's the truth. Everyone does their own. You can remove a person from an equation today. People will figure themselves out. There's information everywhere. Everyone wants to be their own person anyway. Not back in the day. You were part of an organization. That was your only source of information and knowledge. And he shepherded his community without any scandal, without when he was in Washington, D.C. with Braveheart, right? And there was another one he came to Hartford, Connecticut, that I prayed, right? You see this community of upright people. That is the feet. The feet is the people. And uprightness, the business owners, the families are in Islam, the kids are in Islam. This is a big feat. And we get to hear it directly from an eyewitness. And really, it's a type of piece of history that I'm glad someone's recording so that everyone can see it. Just out of the ceremony.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. You know, we're coming to the end of Black History Month, a month that was given to try to recognize some of the contributions to the African American community, although it falls short, obviously. And now we see with the very recent one of the executive orders to officially remove that as an official point of commemoration, a further erasure by our current administration of peoples and are trying to erase that or redefine what the history was. Alhamdulillah, we will keep the struggle going and keeping the messages alive for those communities and all those who contributed to the growth not only of America, but more particularly here to Islam in America. We won't let those who seek to silence and to erase to allow that to happen. Alhamdulillah. And so we're really honored to be doing this program here this evening. You know, we just came off the anniversary, 60th anniversary of Hajj Ali Shabaz's assassination that we spoke about previously last week. And that is somebody who many of us are familiar with, Malcolm X. And sometimes we tend to think that the civil rights movement and Islam in America begins and ends with Malcolm X. But it's far greater than that, and it's far more continuous and continues till this day. And the civil rights movement is not merely Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, but continues through this day. And one of those great figures, and possibly the most influential, I would argue, definitely for the Muslim American community, the African American community, is Imam Mohammed, who was a man of great wisdom and humbleness. I think that's what marks his, what I understand of his journey in terms of characteristics that he held, but his influence was tremendous and vast. Alhamdulillah, we're honored to have with us Sister Laila, who I'm just going to read just a very lengthy biography. I'm going to just touch on a few things so you go on to hear from her, inshallah ta'ala. She's a fifth generation African American Muslim. She's an educator, community advocate who was born in Philadelphia and raised in Chicago. She now lives, alhamdulillah, she moved to the East Coast, so we're glad to have her here in New Jersey, alhamdulillah. She graduated from what was known as the University of Islam, which is now known as the Sister Clara Mohammed School System. Currently, she works with a team of educators on curriculum and policy for the 80-plus-year-old private education system. Sister Laila holds a degree in child development, has extensive studies in behavioral science, and is a certified domestic violence advocate, and certified private mediator, and certified Reiki practitioner as well. Her parents, Imam Warith Mohammed, rahmatullah alayhi, and Sister Shirley Allen Mohammed, and her grandparents, Elijah Mohammed and Sister Clara Mohammed, modeled extensively the importance of giving service through charitable acts throughout her life. One of the monumental opportunities she was blessed to have experienced is the development of the Sister Clara Mohammed Memorial Education Foundation. For those who don't know, and involved in Islamic schools in America, before there were the Islamic schools that we know of in this area, there was always the pioneers of those was the Sister Clara Mohammed schools, which continue to this day throughout the United States. But they were the forerunners of Islamic schools. in the United States and continue to go forward. We're really honored and blessed to have Sister Laila with us. I remember as a child meeting her father, Rahmatullah alayhi, and I'd seen him also from a distance in different programs, and now my father used to take me when he would come to the New Jersey, New York area, and so I do remember that, and I just realized one point of connection maybe I can have with him, or maybe I'd like to think that I could connect with him in that way. The great minds think alike, that he chose the same name for his daughter as I chose for mine. So, alhamdulillah. Let's hear from Sister Laila. She's going to just speak with us, and she wants to have a discussion and questions and that sort of thing, so we want to take advantage of the evening, inshallah ta'ala, with her. Jazakallah, Sister Laila.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. With Allah's name, the merciful and the fact of the merciful Redeemer. Everyone, assalamu alaikum. I didn't feel that I have to do all the translations. Alhamdulillah, praise to Allah. So, we're going to be very, very, very comfortable. I'm in a space that is comfortable for all of us. We're in the Masala Masjid, we're among each other, but what's really special is that it's diverse. This is Islam. It's diverse. So what I'm going to do is say a little something, like a historical presentation that, inshallah, will cover my family's history, personal family history. Will also highlight the historical parts of us, and we'll also talk about our culture as African Americans. And then I'm going to open for questions, and I want you all to know that any question is fine. Honestly, I like questions. But maybe once or twice I said, I'm not going to ask that. But ask me anything. Please challenge, because I think that's how we really get to know each other. And so that's what we're going to do. So, as many of you already know, that the great majority of African Americans were born here against their will, great majority from West Africa. Now, many of us came over other ways, but the percentages say that the greater majority were born here afterwards, and from the West Africa area. What in my family, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, my grandma Peggy, as we call her, her mother was born to Georgia from West Africa, from Ghana. We don't know her name, but Grandma Peggy has kept the story alive. What I'm going to share with you now comes from my father's sister, Raya, my auntie. And to keep me from going back and forth, She said that she was a slave in Georgia, Deep Step, Georgia, near Sandersville, and that the owner, of course, he was a European American man. And I actually, if anybody gets back in touch and I'll give you my information, I have to do the truth. So I'll tell you exactly where it was if you want to know that kind of stuff. But anyway, so the point is that she was the daughter of the owner, the slave master, because he had impregnated her mother. And she lived and worked on the plantation within his house. And her job was to take care of his two daughters, who were actually her sisters. Okay? So this particular day that she told my Aunt Laila about was, she was dressing them for a gathering. She said a party. And, you know, she dressed them, they went to the party, and then they came back, and she has to undress them and prepare them for the evening. When they come back, they're so excited. And they're talking about what a good time they had. And as they're talking, they describe the fun. And the fun was a lynching of an African American. Now, this is my point. My point is not for us to feel sad, because we're going to do that. Human beings, we have emotions. My point is that my grandma Peggy was very, very disciplined. Because even back then, if she had a flinched or got attitude, you know, I'm from Chicago, South Side, but most women nowadays, because of the social media and stuff, we all know how to, you know, we get a little attitude. And so I just am amazed that she kept her cool. And more than amazing, I am so very grateful. Because I wouldn't be here. And more importantly, her grandson, Elijah Mohammed, wouldn't be here. And then my father. So what I gained from that story is that we have to know when and how to fight. And that's just one story. That's just my family story. But there are many, many African Americans, men, women, children, old, young, who held their cool, who controlled their emotion so that we could survive. And even for those of us in this audience that are not African American, that affects you. Because if you think about so many things that you do in one day, if you research it, African American invented it. Destroy it. You use countless things in a day. We all drive around this world. The street lights invented by an African American. So if they didn't keep their cool, they'd all been killed. Or mentally murdered. But there were people like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Booker T. Washington, Nat Turner, so many people that are in history and that are not in history, like my grandma Peggy, who allowed this space to be as it is, who helped for this to happen. So that's my first thing, because as a woman, she's my hero, you know, and I have nothing to complain about when I think about Grandma Peggy. I should just be quiet and just keep working. So as I move forward, I mentioned that her grandson was Elijah. And I think about how me now as a grandmother, how I pray for my grandchildren. And so I would think that her prayer was answered because she probably did not know to say, I'll pray my grandson becomes a Muslim or I'm certain that she asked the Lord to protect and give her grandson opportunity and safety and good health. So when the migration took place, my grandmother and grandfather, my grandmother's name was Caroline, and she was in the same area, the Sandersville area. Her father was a preacher, he was kind of wealthy. My grandfather's father was a preacher, but he wasn't less wealthy. And so they met, they wanted to get married. The parents didn't want them to get married because of the differences. And they helped, and they got married. Then they moved and migrated to Detroit, Michigan with my grandfather's grandma Peggy, his mother Marie, his father Willie, and several of his siblings. I remember my Uncle John, who had a lot of children and lived in Detroit. His wife was Bernstein, and they did a lot to help. They were not just helpers, they were collaborators. They worked together, and that's what my father, Imam Mohammed, he said to me a few years before he passed, and the things that he said stand out in my mind that happened like that last year. And one of the things he said, Laila, when you talk about our family, let people know that your grandfather and your grandmother came to Islam as a family. That is very important generally, but specifically for Islam. One of the main goals of the Islamic community is to build family-like community. And so if you come together like that, that's the foundation. And I think that is one of the reasons, maybe a minute reason, but one of the pieces in the puzzle to the Nation of Islam, to what evolved into what our brother says. Some people say Imam Muhammad's mosque. Well, I don't say that. I agree with him that the mosque, the masjid, is the mosque, the masjid. It belongs to the people that are there. But I say Imam Muhammad's association. And I got that from him. He said that we are an association built upon an experience. And the experience started in 1933, so, with W.D. Farrar. Our brother spoke about W.D. Farrar earlier. I won't go into that, but what I will say, if you're interested in that history, I suggest that you Google Fatima Fanusi. She was a doctorate student, and her dissertation was on W.D. Farrar. Her professor was Dr. Suleiman Yang at Howard University in D.C. I'm the kind of person, and this is the way my father raised me. My husband goes to the city, but I'm not going to accept what you're saying real easy. And so a lot of people, even my father, they told me, well, that's what research did. And some of the stuff I wasn't feeling. She was so kind to me. She let me drill her, and ask her questions. And I really think that it's worth reading. I think she's right. I think her research improves some stuff. So that's W.D. Farrar. So my grandmother, now we're in Detroit. It's the Depression, and people are jumping out windows, as the history says, and doing all kinds of stuff. But a lot of people are doing what my grandfather did, and that is he was self-medicated. We were told that he was a fall down alcoholic. And my grandmother was brave and in a state of emergency. How am I going to save my family? So as we sisters do, we talk to each other. And she had been talking to her girlfriend. Her girlfriend knew the situation, and her girlfriend's situation might have been quite similar. overheard W.D. Farrar at one of his meetings. He sold fabrics, and he had these like corner meetings where they called them temples, and he talked about his philosophy. And his philosophy was an empowering message for African American people, at that time called so-called Negroes or Negroes, but it was also sprinkled, as I say, sprinkled with hints to Islam. He said, Allah. He said, you don't eat pork. He said, you don't steal, you're clean, you're righteous, you know. So my grandmother's friend told her, you need to go hear this guy. He taught us some good stuff. So my grandmother went. And when my grandmother came home, she told my grandfather, and sisters, he listened. And then they went back. Of course, you see that I have this thing about getting power from the women in my family. But yes, he heard it, you know, and they loved each other. And I'm sure, just as our prophet President, peace be upon him, how he heard Lady Khadijah, may Allah have mercy and bless his heart, when he was confused about what was happening with them. So a husband and wife have that connection. And she asked him to go, he went. Now this is what happened. He heard one time. They passed the bucket after the speech and asked for a donation. He had a dime in his pocket, and he gave the dime. My father and my aunts and uncles told us that their family was so poor, they ate spoiled food. But he gave his last dime. He told my grandmother, we're going to go home and throw the pork out. He said, we're Muslims. Alhamdulillah. Praise be to Allah. And that's what he did. And that's what they did. And they learned Al-Fatiha, who many scholars say encompasses the whole Quran. And there was never a time ever in my young life, and many people who have come through that experience, Al-Fatiha was all day long every day. I mean, and there was such a great respect. If somebody said, started praying, the room was still and quiet. And it's something that this modern day, included me, we should take heed to that. When someone is praying, we're talking to Allah. So why is everybody talking? And that stands out in my mind about them. So they were Muslims. Now, fast forward, I would like for you to make note that the Honorable Elijah Mohammed, he did make Imam. A lot of people don't know that, but he made Imam. My grandmother also told my father, because many of you may know that my father began to differ with his father in philosophy, got put out several times, 3 to be exact. But one time my grandmother told my grandfather Wallace, and my father was called Wallace for many years until he began to, he evolved into saying that Wallace was Warith, and Warith for inheritor, and then Deen, Deen for faith, inheritor of the faith. That was for the Deen. But literally this verse is what it says, Wallace D. Muhammad. There was nothing but D. And the story goes that W.D. Farrar, when my grandmother was pregnant, he wrote Wallace D. Muhammad on the door and said she was going to have a boy, and that boy would help her husband. And my father said one time in the lecture, some of you all might remember, he said, oh, W.D. Farrar, he was 50-50 right, you know, he took a chance. But yeah, so I went to a space. Oh, so my grandfather made me one. My grandmother, he and her and the family, 3 generations of family, began to study under W.D. Farrar and learn that philosophy and live that history in public schools, if they are truly public for everybody. The right for a child to go to class and not be afraid that the police are going to take them because they're unvalued. The safety of an educational space. So because of that, my grandmother and several others, they did not want their children to go to the public schools in Detroit. So they began to keep their children home and homeschool them. The story goes that one day, the truant officer, the police, came to my grandmother's house and told her that if she didn't put her kids in school, her children in school, she was going to be arrested. And she told them, I will die as dead as this door before I let you take my children. And that's the kind of faith she had. And that is what I will go back to Grandma Penny, because many of the African Americans that have led this civil rights movement here in America, this equality, this stressing, like Malcolm said, that we just want the same thing you have. This thing where you just get out my way. My husband always says that I don't need you to do anything for me. Just get out my way. Now I ain't gonna put it on the spot. So just get out my way. And so this movement, it came from the fact that they had faith and they stepped out on faith. And we are now in America in a space where we got to step out on faith. We can't be afraid. Now we have to do as we Muslims say, we got to tie our hands. We got to step out on faith and be very certain that we have the right and the same right as everybody else. Allah said that He made all of us our own. Do we believe it? So I'm going to move on now to late 50s and 60s. And just to say a couple things. Imam Mohammed, I think he had been put out once by that time. But now it's 1958, and he is a newlywed, married to my mother. And in my bio, it had my mother had transitioned, but my mother transitioned a year and a half ago, and I've been through all of They moved to Philadelphia on the East Coast. And it was because Dr. Muhammad wanted my father to be a minister at what was then called Temple Number 12. And he moved. I was born in Philly. I like to brag on that and say I'm on the East Coast. And, but the reason I mention it is because you being here, you know how easy, well, used to be easy, now it costs a little bit, to go across the bridge from Philly to New York and all, you know, how to the tri-state area. So Brother Malcolm at the same time, him and Sister Betty, they were in New York. My mother and my father were in Philly. And my parents, along with other, what we call pioneers, have shared with me how they would get together and to speak our language, they would have hummus on a regular. That was the South Side coming out on a regular. And they also, some sisters have told me that are still alive in Philadelphia. Oh, we were praying like we pray now back then. Wow, taught us how to pray like that back then. And that's the same one of the things that my grandmother, that's what happened, that my mind was back on the I wanted to share with you that she told my father, you know, your father prays like the people when he eats on the floor, and gave my Islamic Studies, or not it was called President of Islamic Studies and African American History in upstate Livington, New York. We have still among us Imam Kareem and Sister Gloria Kareem. They were all students. They know the Quran in Arabic, just like any Arabic-speaking person. But the difference for them is that they also speak English. And they can translate. And that was the power and one of the good things about Imam Mohammed. He knew the English language. So, whereas the common translation for Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the merciful, the compassionate, he said, well, no, let's think about the merciful benefactor and the merciful redeemer. You know, and so, because some things get lost in translation. I'll give you another thing about why it's so important that this man who in 75, 76, 77 gave the Shahada to hundreds of thousands of people. And it is because when he read the Quran, his first language was English, so he could understand it better as an American and an English-speaking person. For many, many years, I'm 65, so a good 30 years ago, and even 20 years ago, and still today, but today they get in real trouble. But people would just say like it was nothing that the Quran said that you would beat your wife. They would say that was nothing. And Imam Mohammed was one of the first people that took that word out. And he explained it to me in this way because I became a domestic violence advocate and he wanted me to really be able to explain myself. He said, imagine if you're in a boat and you have an oar and you take the oar and it's directing and moving the water, it's helping you to direct and move and guide. He said the same word for taking the oar in the water is the same as dialogue. So he said you're not to hit your wife or beat your wife, you're to direct her, you're to guide her. And now many people speak of it that way. One brother who I love, he's in DC. He has an organization called Adam, I think, Adam or something. You know that? African brother. Okay, so do you remember during President Obama's tenure, you know how they had a church that Sunday, that interfaith thing? Yep. Yeah, Muhammad Magic. Because he and I did it that year. Yeah, so he uses that same type of explanation. And this is what we have to do. to Imam for his research. When I said language and embrace the language, we have a language that is being taught at Harvard and other places, and you've probably heard of it. It's called Bulagichi. And people say that only a particular group of African Americans can claim that language. Imam Shahi's research has proven to me and many others that on the simple fact that the great majority of slaves came from that Geechee corridor and then spread out in the United States, that language was created there, and this is no argument, that it's made up of Arabic and French and I think a colloquial, English, I don't know if I said it right. So, all of us can claim it. And the reason that I embrace it is because when I was a young college student, I was attracted to taking sociology classes. I really love sociology, but I couldn't grasp the idea that I didn't have a culture because I knew what you had to have culture. And I didn't because I was a student of Imam Mohammed. I didn't say that Islam was my culture because ever since I can remember, my father always told me that Islam can enhance our culture and that wasn't my culture. But I never thought to ask him, well, what is it? So we lived a particular way. But when I got older enough, I'm like, well, who am I? And because many times when my dad got put out, I was around immigrant Muslims. I always was in diverse spaces, and I would see how they had culture, and I just felt some kind of emptiness. Well, when I realized and I embraced it, that's my language, and then even saw, because you can Google the words, the vocabulary, we use those words. And I just think it's empowering. That now I can have a conversation and I can tell somebody that, oh, my mother's tongue is Bulagichi. And they say, what? And then they start saying, well, you talking about your mom? No. You talking about background? No. I said, and I got this from him. I said, how the Jewish people made up a language called Yiddish? Language can develop like that, and that's how ours developed from the enslaved Africans that were in that area. So now to get back, which also connects. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, one of the things he always talked about is that we had this script, and he talked about that our culture had been taken from us. So the Nation of Islam began to build like a syllable culture. And he began to do many things like, with diet that we see now, this whole how to live, many of the things he said, they're saying to us now. We were using turmeric back then. We would color our rice with turmeric. We put turmeric in big soup. So all of these things are connected. Yesterday, please stop me. So yesterday was February 25th, and that was the day that Elijah Muhammad transitioned. Today is February 26th. So my father asked to come back. He was able to come back. And senior moment, I don't know where I was going. Thank you. But I don't remember. So, okay, so anyway, so we're there at the Savior's Day. Oh, I was talking about the date. That today is the 26th. And part of the reason why I'm like all over the place is because it was really an impactful time in my life. And I don't really know what to do with today is the 26th. So, yesterday was the 25th. My grandfather passed. February 20th was 50 years of my graduation from the University of Islam. And we only had 4 years to high school. We started school very young, like 2, 3 years old. So I graduated at 15 years old. I'm not a brain, but I didn't do my homework and I studied. But the reason I'm saying this is because I want you to know the quality of the education that we had. Now, all the schools around the country had different qualities, but some of them, and the one that I went to in Chicago, we took the standard test and we were admitted into universities and colleges. I went to the University of Chicago, not Chicago, University of Illinois. It was then called Circle Campus at 15 years old. And I was not the only one. So, but it's got my mind in space because 50 years sounds like a long time. And then yesterday was 50 years of Elijah Muhammad's transition. And I can remember the call from my parents, and they said that my grandfather had passed. And that me, being the oldest child and babysitting my siblings, that I should turn off the TV and the radio, don't answer the phone, don't answer the door. Shortly after that, my parents came home, and they came home with security guards. Me and my siblings are looking like, really? You know, it's different because we didn't live like that. And they told us, pack a bag, and you're moving. We moved to what was called then the palace, my grandfather's house. You can move. He had some houses built in Hyde Park. And we lived there 1 year. I'll tell you, 15 years old, a girl, I loved it. it was a really nice house, a really nice room, all of that. But I am so grateful for my father. Because he said after 1 year, he said, we're going back home. He said, we can't live like this. And it was simply because it wasn't a honest life. It was not the way he wanted to live and raise his children and be with his wife. And I am grateful because I know how important it is for us to be humble and modest. And we have that example from our prophet Muhammad. So modesty is very important to be humble. Even if you can afford it, you know, you want to be comfortable, but you don't want to be lavish. And so, Imam Mohammed was that type of person. They had Sister Aisha Mustafa from the Muslim Journal newspaper editor. She gave a speech last night on the virtual space. And she said, and talked about how Imam Mohammed gave so much money away to people and her children and each child, strangers' child. And it's the truth. His neighbors in the last house that he lived in, he had candy. When you got to the door, you would see the lollipops. You know how when you go to the dentist's office and they have lollipops in this little box? He had one of those. I don't know where he got it from. And his neighbors loved him, and he was just much he had sacrificed for his people, and he wanted to give something to him and his family. And I believe that's because he knew, as many of us know, even if you're not an imam, even if you're not an imam's wife, if you're a teacher, if you're a crossing guard, and all of you 9 times out of 10 are a working parent, when you work, you neglect your family sometimes because you're so busy working for the family or working for the cause, and you forget. And he knew that that's what Nelson Mandela, of course, obvious all the time in prison, but he knew he had a kinship of that mentality. And she shared that, and I think that was nice that she shared that. And so I'm going to wrap up by saying that in 75, 77, as I mentioned, Imam Mohammed took the Nation of Islam to what we call Islam as revealed to our prophet, praise and peace be upon him. Islam is in the Quran. And it was a smooth transition. It was actually based upon the Shura. Imam Mohammed, there are people who will witness this that are still alive. They've told me, because I didn't witness this, but he told officials, meaning the ministers, the captains, other business officials, that you have to take a vote. I'm not going to do this unless you vote. So when you go to these different museums and you read these different articles, or you Google and it says Imam Mohammed assumed leadership, he didn't assume nothing. He was voted in unanimously to take that leadership, to uphold that responsibility that was given to him before he was even born. And I'm speaking now as a daughter. He made that a priority in his life, even against what he wanted to do. My father loved boxing, and he used to box until his mother told him, you can't do that anymore because you have to help your father. So he stopped. My father went to Harold Washington Community College. It was called, I think, Washburn or something. I forgot what the name of the school was at that time. And got a welding certificate. He was a welder and worked, I should say, and worked for Bethlehem Steel in Chicago, making good money. But this is what he said. I remember as a kid, because I used to be worried, you know that? He said, I loved it. He liked doing it because it had a little artistry in it. And one time he gave me a fish. He had welded and made a fish and gave it to me as a gift. So he put that aside. And this is what our leaders do. They prioritize the work. And for that, I'd like for us to remember, not just Imam, not just Muhammad, but all of our leaders, not just African American leaders, not just Muslim leaders, all of the people who put aside their personal self for the work. And that's what we should do as individuals in our small way. Put aside our personal feelings, as my grandma Peggy did, and I'm going to close on this. She put aside that hate anger. She went to slap those little girls. I know she did. But she put aside her personal feelings for what I call the work. But she probably just said so her family could live. Thank you. That's what I want.
Let's open our discussion and questions. And since I have the mic first, I'm going to take advantage of that. Propose a few questions. But just one comment that just occurred in terms of the importance of narrative and what we value here in America and what we're taught to value, and just to how things are interconnected when you Nelson Mandela, just the situation we're in right now, how things connect to things. You know, it's interesting that does anyone know where the statue of Nelson Mandela was in Palestine, Israel? It's not in Tel Aviv. It was in Ramallah. Was. Right? Who celebrated Nelson Mandela? Tells you the value that they put in him. When you go down to the Independence Hall in Philadelphia, what is the last portrait you see before the Liberty Bell? Nelson Mandela. Because we're told that is the figure we're supposed to value for his stance and what he stood for. As Americans, that's what we're told in our education system. We're told, at least I was brought up that way in my school. And that's even celebrated to some degree, even in its, like I said, the last portrait you see before the Independence and Liberty Bells, Nelson Mandela's portrait. But if others had their way, that would be torn down as well. So when people are telling us that we share values with others in other parts of the world, yeah, we do. But it's not who they're telling us. We share values with those of the oppressed. Just as they value Nelson Mandela, yes, we as Americans will honor the likes of Nelson Mandela. So these things are interconnected, these struggles are interconnected. Just as a side note, again, in the situation we're in, we don't always draw the connections. Malcolm himself traveled where? To Gaza. And what he spoke about Gaza then is as relevant as it is today. And what is that we're experiencing back then and what he spoke about is the same as we're seeing today. That these forces that stand for something of the dark side of American history, that want to still continue that and has continued wholesale in a foreign nation, everything that we are ashamed of, everything that we are embarrassed of, everything that we're trying to redress from the Native Americans to the African Americans in this country, that is what is celebrated as American values in other parts. And that's what we're being forced to find. So this is why these things are interconnected. It's so important for us because it's not only a narrative of what is over there, it's how they're trying to redefine what we should be celebrating here, which we're trying to come out of all of that trauma as a nation. And they want to revive it as it was something glorified. So the struggles are the same, and we see the interplay of these struggles. It's a worldwide struggle. And this is the struggle of the prophets. It's always the oppressed against the oppressor. If you ever want to know where the prophets are in any issue, identify the oppressed. And that's where you will find the prophets of God. Never with the oppressor, regardless of those who proclaim their names in that. So I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a few questions before we get to the others. This will be part of the discussion part. Regarding your father's political position, we are given an image of the civil rights struggle, which we know is not wholly accurate, but the image is there is the Elijah, Malcolm on one side of this oppositional, and then there was the Martin, which was the more quote-unquote cooperative approach. How did your father view in terms of the role of the African American struggle in general within the greater society for civil rights? And I guess also within the Muslim context as well too, but more is that in terms of his political philosophy of how to engage. And I say that because Muslims are struggling to figure out how to navigate the waters we're in. And so how did your father frame our role in terms of engaging society and how we should be making change and
So what I'm going to do is just give you, instead of an answer, but some examples. So one, I would say that my father handed him, and this was the blessing that he was given and that he treasured. He lived according to what Allah says in the Quran. Even if it was against him, you know. So I'll give you an example. Because by the time, by 1960, 61, he was very clear, not totally clear, but he was clear, he understood the Quran, and he had different in the philosophy, he had gotten put out. So now it's the Vietnam War, and he's been drafted. Like Muhammad Ali and many others, he was in the Nation of Islam. He's a minister in Philly. And he was a follower of his father. So the command was, you don't go to the white man's war. And so my father told me that he believed, and to this day, because he told me this as an adult, grown adult, that he believed, and he was telling me I should believe and hold tight to it, in leadership. And not necessarily leadership in a priesthood or dictatorhood, and even in the way some of the imams are, but a leadership in that the way Allah says, if it's free of you, then the best is to that. So if we in the space and we come to an agreement that you are the most qualified to lead in this situation, then I'm going to fall in line. You my leader. And so even though he didn't really feel like he needed to object, and the reason he didn't feel he needed to object is because they had already told him he was going to cook in the kitchen. And he told me, he said, I would have taken honor to cook for the soldiers who were protecting this land that we live in. So that was how he thought about it. You see, it was a conflict, but it was and what I think is that it comes from the Quran. Allah tells us that we're to obey and respect the law of the land. However, he tells us to take ourselves out of oppression. And you can do that in America. You can obey the law, but you can rise up. We have that right here. You just have to know, we just have to know how to do it. And so that's one thing, and I think that sort of answers. The other thing that he did that people probably know is that early along he picked up the American flag. And some of the Muslims in associations that he was friends with, the allies with, like the first time he went to Hajj was in 1967, and it was with a group of Dr. Mohammed and some of the Islam people that are called Islam now, they were Muslim Student Association back then. I was around 7, 8. I remember going to the summer camp with them, and when I think back, I know my parents never really let me go places and spend the night especially, but I stayed with them, strangers, for 7 days. And it impressed upon me what my parents wanted me to learn, because that's where I really learned and my prayers and how to make the salat and my surah. That's where I was able to make wudu for Fajr in the well water, and those things stay with a person. So, and that's where I saw the diversity in Islam. But anyway, he went on Hajj with these people, and they came to him, and they're like, you shouldn't be doing this. And he said, no, I'm an American. And this is something he always said. He said, you can be an American Laila and a Muslim at the same time. And that really is what America is. People say the American culture. There is no American culture. America is a diverse space. People used to say that it's a space, a melting pot. I would point, and I don't have that one with me. I have poetry that I'm going to read something before we finish. But the poem said, no, we're not a melting pot because that makes everything disappear. We're a beautiful sky with garbanzo beans, with jalapenos, with navy beans, you know, with American spice, you know, and you put it in a nice clear bowl and you can see the beauty. And that's the culture of America. The culture of America is diversity. And you have to know your culture to be able to do that. To answer, again, your question, Imam Mohammed, according to Imam Shaheed, Imam Sultan, and some other imams who shared this with me, one of the first things he did for the ministers who then were called imams was to give them information on the culture. Because he wanted them to know who they were. He wanted us to know who we are. You're not just Muslim. Yes, you are a Muslim, but Allah made us different. We're African American Muslims. As Imam Mohammed said, we are reality Muslims. We are Chinese. We're Hispanic. We're from Ghana, Egypt, Palestine, Bosnia. So we're diverse, and we should embrace that diversity. And that's what America is. If we Muslims could live and be an example and a mirror for the world, I think we could do what Imam Mohammed says if we make the world. But we have to know ourselves as individual cultures. Lastly, I will say this. I remember when he went and he spoke with our brother Phil in Arabic. And he spoke with Arabic. And I remember he said something. And sometimes my father will say stuff that now that I'm a little older, I'm like, well, I understand. But I've been thinking like, ooh, you said that? And he said about the Palestinians, he was like, something to this, I'm paraphrasing, but he had been oppressed that long, he would be doing the same thing, that they brave to be picking up sticks and you blame them for trying to fight back, you know, something like that. But he would never get into the pool of politics. And I've had friends of mine, colleagues of mine, that wanted to get into politics and asked me to ask him for his advice. And I'm quoting now. And I'm not saying that politics is bad, but this is what he advised them. If you go into politics in America, you are going to have to make some concessions. And you are going to have to agree to be a part of some things that you are not going to feel comfortable with. So just go into it knowing that. And so I am a person that was quiet as a young woman, but then I became loud and activist and just, you know, I'm ready to march on somebody. And so I would talk to my father and say, Dad, why don't you can you just put out a statement on this issue? What? And he said, no, I'm not doing that. He said, I'm not mixing Islam with the politics. And that was his choice. But he supported people that were politicians. And he did stand up and do things that were civil rights type things or patriotic things. He was the first Muslim to say the prayer at the Pentagon and also the inauguration. It was because of him that we can take off from work and they don't penalize us and go to Juma, because he started that. He said, look, I know this is our right. We can go pray and they can't penalize us. He said, you can take your children out of school for the Eid and they can't penalize you. And now in New Jersey, our sister over there with her team,
So maybe one historical question to be detailed. What was your father's relationship with Malcolm when Malcolm was ousted? Did he maintain that relationship with him, or did he distance himself from Malcolm? Maybe you can shed some light on that.
And I'm glad you asked me, because I would like to say, not just at that point, but what was his relationship, period. So, children, you know who your parents like and who your parents don't like, even if they don't tell you. And I remember all of my life, from the time my mother and father were in my life as a child, as an adult, to their parents. All of my life. Whenever they talked about the two, there was a month's time in Philadelphia, their faces lit up. And one of the things they talked about was, and I'm saying how they said, Malcolm men. They were friends. And Brother Malcolm was an older brother figure in that Imam Mohammed was younger in years and looked up to Malcolm because of his street set. But then Brother Malcolm looked and respected my father for his Islamic knowledge. And so my father shared this with me. He said that one time when they worked in Philly and New York, that Brother Malcolm came to him and said that he had been to Chicago and spoke to the messenger, because I'm quoting now, and spoke to the messenger, and he said, I asked the messenger, and told the messenger, told the messenger that I had problems with some of the stuff that we're preaching. And he said that the messenger, Muhammad, told him, when you have problems, talk to Wallace. And so my father told Brother Malcolm that do what I do. Whatever you have a problem with, don't teach it. Only teach that you don't have a problem with. So they had this friendship and this working relationship. I have pictures of me and Attila playing on the floor as babies. They were friends. They were colleagues, because they were both ministers. They were brothers in Islam. Now, when Malcolm got put out, my father was out at the same time. They both got in trouble around the same time. And some people may know that Brother Malcolm had written a letter and asked to come back. And what my family, like cousins and a couple of like aunt, they told me that my grandparents were going to let him come back. And they also said that when the assassination, when they heard over the news, I had a couple of cousins who were there, because in my grandparents' house, every day most people, they were at their house eating dinner and stuff like that. And I didn't know, I believed them. They said they were crying. They said my grandfather said, we told him to search the people. And now, I thank Allah that the truth is out. Because years ago, when I used to say it was a conspiracy, people would look at me like, and even BASA, she and I have done some things together and been in some safe places. And I the people, we the people, to clean it up. That's our responsibility. So, Brother Malcolm, when he was out, I don't have any recollection or anything that my parents said to me about them communicating. However, there is a radio recording that's on YouTube. If you contact me at sisterlaila.com, I can get that link to you. And my father talks about how him and Brother Malcolm were going to work together. Now, my father did tell me that Brother Malcolm asked him to be the imam. So yes, my answer is yes. That's your opinion. He said that Brother Malcolm asked him to be the imam of the organization that Brother Malcolm was starting. And he said that Malcolm said he was going to lead the nationalistic part and he wanted Imam Mohammed to be the imam. However, my father told him no, that he wasn't going to go against his father like that at this time. And I remember as a young girl, like 12, 13, maybe 11, my father saying to me more than once, I can't wait until I can tell the truth. And he just knew he had to be patient because he trusted his parents' word that it was his responsibility to take the next step. So he did not. But they can read a letter. My father reads a letter that Malcolm wrote him on this interview. So yes, they were in communication.
All right, inshallah, we can have some questions from the floor. Please speak up. Don't be shy.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me for being here and for the contributions of all your family members to the Ummah. My name is Medina. My question, my eyes lit up when we talked about Ghana. As a West African myself, I am really, really intrigued just by your life experiences. And the question that I have would be, how can we bridge the gap between African and African American communities, given their shared histories, rich traditions of Islam, and the systemic forces that often marginalize both our communities and divide us? Particularly, we know that there are so many different books about like service of Allah, African Muslims enslaved in America, and the famous story about Omar ibn Said. So I would just love your insight on that.
So the question is how can we build that bridge?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So I think simply by embracing what Allah says, get to know each other. So I'm going to tell you something. One thing, it would take us nights. We have to be strong like the believers were when Imam Mohammed first became the leader. One time I was out here with him in New Jersey, as Allah is my witness, he talked from 9 straight out. So, but, you know, and if I could tell you everything, it would take us a long time. So something that I didn't touch on was his interfaith work. And one of the long-standing 30-year relationships was with the folklore. You can Google PR a little bit folklore. And you can even Google Imam Mohammed. That was a part of what got into he spoke in the Vatican, etc. So the reason I'm bringing up that is because Kiara Woodard, she spoke to, it was several thousand African American Muslims at the invitation of Imam Mohammed in Washington, D.C. And I was in that audience. Now, Kiara was 15 during World War II when she started this movement. And she was so powerful, her and her fellow teenage friends, they simply started doing what they say. They took one part of the Bible, a little simple few sentences, and said they were going to live it. Now, that's that one thing. The other thing was that at this lecture in D.C., she based her lecture upon how many times love was mentioned in the Quran. And that was very powerful for me and many others, because for some reason, Muslims don't always talk about love like that. You know, even though we should, say, for example, and this was like maybe 20 plus years ago, maybe 25 years ago. I said, I'm going to begin to embrace and live that Allah said that He made us different to get to know each other. And so I began to do what I'm doing now. I'm not a lecturer, and I just really ask Allah, forgive me, and I say a stuff a lot, and I have to pinch myself because I really don't know why I should be talking to you, because I'm not an academic or any of those things. But I love people, I love to talk, I love diversity, and I have been blessed in such a way that now me as a great-grandmother, I have to give back. I have been blessed to be in this historical situation. So I have been embracing living what Allah says, getting to know each other. Just last weekend in Somerset, New Jersey, we had a women's retreat. And the women's retreats that I do in collaboration with different organizations, specifically Compassion Action Foundation and the Muslim Journal, it's all about diversity. If we bring our program to you, you have to have diversity. And so that's what I think. We just simply need to get together. The Folklore and Imam Mohammed's Association, 30 years of relationship around the country, African Americans and European Americans embrace simply by having what they call encounters. And all of us will get coffee or tea and some bread and sit down and talk. So that's what we need to do, more of that. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Let's exchange information. Yes, sir.
So, as your father assumed or took over the...
Voted, he take over. He was voted in.
So when he was voted in, was there any other, as he progressed the organization, was there significant kind of resistance to any of the change and how did he navigate that?
Definitely. So, yeah, it was definitely resistance. I think it was 2 years later that Mr. Farnheim, who stood up and preached and cried, gave his loyalty. And I think he cried because he knew he wasn't going to do it. And I love him. He knows that, and he knows also I'm speaking my mind. But anyway, he left and took people with him 2 years later. So yes, there was uncomfortableness. One of the main things that people were uncomfortable with Imam Mohammed was the same thing they were uncomfortable with him when he was in Philadelphia. And that's because he didn't believe in that you had to be paid and that the money that was collected went to the minister or the imam. He felt that you shouldn't have to tax yourself and go broke to be an imam, but that the imam was not a job. And he, so he took some of that money, some of that lavishness away. And so they didn't like that. And then the other thing was the control. Because Imam Mohammed in 1980-something, he spoke to a group of students, and that's that picture that you see. You Google it. His fingers are pointing at his head, and he began to say, man means mine. And he embraced that all of us have the equal and the same responsibility to develop our mind. One of his last lectures that he did in Detroit, Michigan, before he passed, I think it was in September of 2007 or 8. He said that anyone, male or female, over the age of puberty, should be prepared and have the knowledge to do and lead prayer, to do a khutbah, to do a nikah, a marriage, to do a janazah. And people say, men and women? Yes. she shared with him that they were having a problem with Juma because they didn't have a brother in it. And he said, what's wrong with you all? You can't lead yourself? And that was that. Now I'll say this, back to your question, that whole political thing. He in no way is telling us sisters to open up a masjid and to be the imam. I have no desire, but when I'm at home, by myself, and my husband's not there to call the adhan, I call the adhan. My father, because I was his oldest, and my brothers were young, when he would lead us, and my mother was the best pronunciator, and so I would do econ. So it's about what you have and who is the best to do it in that situation. So I think I've answered the question and gone a little. Did I answer your question? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sister Laila, we just want to, I personally, and I know most of us do, we want to just tell you how much we love you
Love you too.
and we respect you. And your father and your grandfather, they will always be remembered. They were powerful men. And thanks to them and the law and road that they laid out for us is what make us the Muslims that we are today. We would have never knew about the Quran, we would have never knew about the Salat, we would have never knew about Arabiya and striving to be, a good Muslim if it wasn't for your dad and your grandfather.
Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah, and I agree with everything you said, but I have come to the openness that Allah in His infinite mercy and His wisdom, if we open ourselves up, He will use all of us. He will use all of us. Yeah. I love that. Well, it's not.
I have a question about your being born into fame, kind of, because you're being born into fame, right? Your father was famous when you were
Oh, born into fame. Yes. I didn't hear the word fame. I said, did she say fame? I didn't know what you said. Yes, yes. So I guess you, yes. I guess you can say that.
They say in the science of purification of the soul that the hardest thing for the child of a famous religious leader is to develop humility because and not love leadership because they were given it for free and without earning it when they were a kid. So how did you deal with that, and how did you come to a point where you're saying only for the sake of Allah?
I think Allah's mercy, because I wasn't always, and you said fame, that tickles me, but I call it the fishbowl. I didn't always live in the fishbowl. You know a fishbowl? And so, like I said, when my father was put out, what I didn't say is that we were put out too. I remember being a young girl in about maybe first grade, maybe second, whatever. Going to the University of Islam on Greenwood in Chicago, and I was quiet back then. I was very shy and quiet, and I got called to the principal's office. And I'm thinking, what do I do? And so they set me on the bench. You don't want to sit on the bench in the principal's office back then. And I was scared, terrified. And the lady, the teacher said, oh, don't worry, you're okay. Your mother's coming to get you. My mother came to get me. I had been put out. I had to go to public school. I couldn't no longer go to the Muslim school. And during that time, until I got to be a little over 10, so for about 3-4 years, and those were formative years, wonderful things about my mom. I can remember like it was yesterday hearing them say, she's the hypocrite's daughter. Oh yes, I wasn't famous, but that was the mercy of Allah. We were poor. We ate beans and, we were poor. My mother had, anybody remember S&H reading stamps? My mother would go to Goodwill, and I embrace this. I'm not crying, trust me, because it's the mercy. My mother would go to Goodwill and buy a woman's dress. My mother would always do this. She would touch the fabric, and if she buy it, it was good fabric. And she cut that dress up and made me and my sister a skirt, a jacket, and a little tan. And she taught me how to go shopping with a little bit of money and plan the meal for the week. So the mercy of Allah is that I grew up in formative years as Wallace and Cheryl Jordan on the south side of Chicago, going to Enrico Primary School. That was Allah's mercy. So, yes, I was born into this famous family, but I didn't know nothing about that. When we came back, and when I was a little over 10, my mother told me this. She said, Laila, she said, when you get to the school, you're going to see and hear some things. And I'm telling you, my mom said, my mother was very frank. She said, I don't care what they tell you, I want you to remember that you, and I'm going to make it a little nice, you go to the restroom the same way everybody else does. Because they talked about what he just said, first family. They also talked about royal family. And my mother was like, I don't care who your grandfather is, you're not that. However, I did not get treated that way also, because my father, in a few years, he said some stuff that I put out here. So now I'm in 8th grade at the University of Islam, and my mother's concerned because I'm developed now, I'm a girl, and she went to my grandfather and said, can we please not be put out with fathers so that Laila doesn't have to go to public school. And he was the grandfather. He put the grandfather hat on and he said, yeah, y'all can stay. So I was able and so I was able to stay in school and go to school, but I was still Wallace's daughter. And what was Wallace? He was the hypocrite. So when I went to school, my cousins would go through the line, family, they say, whoa, family. But when me and my other classmates that were not, quote, in the family, and I being the hypocrite's daughter, we had to get that down. So Allah's mercy let me see all the sides. And so people assume that they know my story. Yes, I have been very, very blessed. And yes, I have seen some things and done some things that only famous people do. Yes. And I thank Allah. I thank Allah. But I also know what it means to be a girl from the south side, playing in the mud and making dirt piles. Yes. So, the mercy of Allah is what will help me. Yes.
So I'll take one more question.
So, so I've been to several temples, and I was recently at Temple 12 for seminary school. I got to meet Sister Fatima Abdullah, mashallah, and she gave us Deen pies. She talked a little bit about the MGT, I think, which is fascinating, and I think it would be wonderful to bring it back to our masajid. Can you tell us if that's even possible and perhaps enlighten us? Because most of our girls don't know anything.
No, yes, I will. But I want to touch on something. Because a lot of times, this is it's a situation that is in America that didn't exist when I was a high school student. saw one person, one thing. It was the Nation of Islam under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad. When you were talking, I had to follow you because when you said that you went to temple number 12, I said, what's she talking about? But under the leadership of Minister Farrakhan, who I will quote Imam Mohammed. Imam Mohammed said that he is very grateful to Minister Farrakhan for keeping his father's memory alive and for respecting his father. And I will say from Laila that I am grateful that Minister Farrakhan embraced and brought in my young cousin Sultan Rahman to help to bring them closer to Islam. May Allah bring us all closer to Islam. Because even though we may think we are not perfect, and so we are not there. There's always a closer that we can get. And so when you said that, I said, what you talking about? Well, you must have gone to temple number 12 in Philly. But if it's called temple number 12, it's not a part of the association that...
No, it's not.
Right. Okay, so you understood that. Okay, so nice. I'm on the same page. Now, to answer the question, yes. So there was a time when Imam Mohammed was in maybe around 2005 report. I don't know if you may remember the date, but he spoke to the brothers at the Regal Theater. It was an all-male session. And I was working as his office manager at that time. And I'm like, Eddie, the brothers are going to bring their wives. What are they going to do? I said, can we and the sisters, can we put something on for them together? So he said, yeah, of course we can do that. So we found a place that wasn't too far from the Regal where they could go. But I said, you can come say something to them, you know. And so he promised me that he was going to come and speak to them. However, it was just the brothers, and just like me, he got involved in the engagement, and he talked a long time. So he never got to us. We had a good time, but he did gift us with a recording, and I have it. I'm not as tech savvy, but I'm working on trying to figure out how I'm going to get it to the public. But he says that. He tells us that we should start doing, again, the MGT. The Nation of Islam under Mr. Farrakhan, they do that. And the MGT classes were simply what it stood for Muslim Girls Training Class. Some people take issue with the word girl. I think it's just symbolic, meaning in my mind, because I'm a student of Imam Mohammed, I try to, as we used to say, science up on stuff, but I read the logic in the language and think about it. And I just think the word girl didn't mean that he was saying women were girls. I think it was because this is what you teach a young person. And because we had been stolen, I mean, our culture had been stolen from us. The things that we learned in Ghana, West Africa, and the other traditions that we had around cooking and cleaning and how we dressed, we had lost that. So now we had to go back to this girl class and get taught these things. Now, all of us weren't like that. A lot of people that joined the Nation of Islam, they were educated. They came from spaces where they knew etiquette. My mother, for example, her mother went to finishing school, so she had culture, but everybody did. And the space that he was focusing on was the one that needed this. And I think we're back at that time, sister. I agree with you. I'm appalled at some of the matters that we have to deal with. People don't understand how to respect themselves, let alone others. You know, simple things like, if I'm with you, then I should be conscious of you and me. If I come to your house and you go feed me, I could at least bring you some candy. If I want to come in your house, I should ask you. I mean, this is little simple stuff. You know, thank you. You know, and it's agree, and I don't call it Muslim girls training class or MGT, but again, get in touch with me, come to some of our retreats, because we do that. And one of the things that we do in the retreats around diversity, we make sure we have the cuisine from all the cultures. So this weekend, we had baklava, but we also had bean soup, and we sometimes have big pie and some collard greens, so we do things different, and then we tell the history behind it, and we share the recipes. And we always have a fashion show, and everybody is told to wear their cultural dress. So, yeah, I agree.
All right, inshallah, we're going to hear from Paul. Sister Laila, something that Sister Laila, you mentioned really resonated, and because it was my father's favorite ayah that he would always say, and he was the important created nations and tribes who know one another. And that that you spoke about, that you mentioned about your father, my father saw it as a lived reality here in the United States. And this is something we totally underappreciate as Muslims living here. Most Muslims in their entire lives will experience the ta'arufu, if they're lucky, once in their lifetime on the Hajj. They experience it once. And we literally have the opportunity daily in our salah, in our masajid, in our communities, to experience this in America continually. We don't have to read the verse and think about what it means. We can experience it and live it. And the unfortunate thing my father used to always point out is how Muslims don't take advantage of that. We make our little silos. This masjid is this ethnicity, this masjid is that ethnicity. We just associate with ourselves, we just associate with our own food, and totally miss the opportunity that 1.7 million Muslims don't have. Just by being part of the community here. What a blessing. But we have to embrace it. Alhamdulillah, I remember as a young child watching documentaries with him and saying, I want to go to that place or that place. And he'd say, why? Let's go to the masjid. You'll see that there. We can get the food there, we can get the people there, hear the language there, hear the masajid there, hear the songs there, hear the nasheeds there, the Turkish, the Urdu, the Arabic. But it's something that we have to take advantage of. And so that's why it's important for events such as this, but also to make sure that we're being part of communities or try to enliven communities to embrace that beautiful aspect of diversity, that we can actually live the verse rather than read about it and contemplate it, as most Muslims in the world, historically and today, do merely intellectually. And if they're lucky, like I said, once or twice in their lifetime, experience it. Alhamdulillah. So, we're going to close with a poem. You going to share with us, please?
Too short.
Oh, too short? Okay, here we go. All right, inshallah, let's do that.
And similar to what you're saying. So the first poem is called Say My Name. And I'm going to read this poem because, yes, to be in this type of space of diversity is what we want. It is very beneficial to the human family. But if you get into a space where you're different, if you don't know who you are, then that's a problem. So this is called, and when people don't respect you and know that you know who you are, meaning don't come into America and melt away. Embrace your culture. Listen to that. Say my name. People call us by names that they have chosen. People describe us from their perception or their stereotype. People label us to fit their agenda. They name us like an object ready for objectification. bold. Yes, bold like the graffiti artist. Be your own person. Be the designer and the fashioner of yourself. Claim your narrative. Tell your story. Choose your name. Speak it. Write it. Make it for all to see. Never let it erase. Tearing down the statues. I'm interjecting. Never let it erase. Who are you? Who are we? Say my name. I am an African Valerian American. Say my name. Now this is my book sitting under the tree. It's my first coffee table book, but my third book report. And if you go to sisterlinda.com, you can be in touch, because I didn't have it to bring. And I also do calendars, and this is the point that's on one of my calendars, and I thought it was fitting for tonight. It's called See It. Equality, unity, opportunity. Let us stop the talking, wishing, and hoping. We must step up, step out on faith. Believe, move on the fact that, this text is long. Move on the fact that we are amazing. We are built to produce. We are built to succeed. We are built to achieve. Our minds and our bodies and our souls equal to any other human being. We are the human mind. We are made up of many shapes and sizes, multiple skin tones across lands near and far. We think, we worship, teach, we lead, we support, we carry, we labor, we push, we birth, we walk, we run, we skip, we jump, we speak, we seek, we sing, we laugh, we cry, we die, and we live. We do it all. We can do everything. We can do anything that another human mind can do. Can you say that? Do you believe that? Yes, you can. You are we, and we are you. Yes, you can. Don't cheapen yourself. Don't be cheap. When you cheapen me, you cheapen yourself. When I cheapen me, I cheapen you. We are the human mind. Know the value of you and me. Be fair and share. It's enough for us all. Look around. The earth is plentiful. Share it. And we can have a freedom space. Yes, we can have a shared freedom space. I ask you, imagine, can you see? I see it. I really do. It is a shared freedom space. Just look around us, a shared freedom space. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah. Takbir. Alhamdulillah, we thank everybody for staying. We know we're a little late. We want to we wanted to make sure we took advantage of this. Alhamdulillah, we're preparing for the month of Ramadan. Friday night, first time we're here. Inshallah ta'ala, the first day of fasting is Saturday, inshallah ta'ala. So please join us for that. And one of the things that something struck me, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity, because we forget that. that the choices that a lot of these individuals we celebrate for the great things that they have done, the imams and those who've struggled, etc., we forget there's families who actually have to go through a struggle and challenges and difficulties because of the choices their parents made. The right choices, alhamdulillah, but there is a cost. And so I thank you for being vulnerable and sharing some of that with us. Some of the challenges as a teenage girl to go through those challenges and difficulties because of the choices we celebrate for your father, but we sometimes forget the impact it had on those of his family. We pray God for your mother, for you and your family, and we thank you for the sacrifices that you had to make to honor your father's legacy and his direction in which he took the community. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you all.
Zachariah Jackson, BASA News. Good night.
Inshallah, she promises to be with us in this month of Ramadan to visit with us. So we're hoping to see her now. The sisters will love her, and the brothers will see her. Inshallah, ta'ala, joining us so forth.
Again, Zachariah Jackson, BASA News. Good night.